This is something else. Trump posted a screenshot of a quote unquote confidential memorandum that his campaign was circulating about polls. And let's go through this together, and then we'll talk about the polls. And we'll talk about how I think it's near time. We'll check in on them, but to sort of go, does it really matter what the polls say? We're going to do the same stuff, right? But here, the panic that's dripping, soaking from this memorandum is shocking. That they're having to now go to such wild lengths to convince their followers to not believe Harris is surging in the polls, that they're trying to debunk the credibility of these. It's goofy. It is. So Trump posted this: Fox polls are rigged and worthless. Now, why would Fox News, and then we'll look at some of this, but why would Fox News have any interest in rigging polls against Trump? They clearly serve Trump's interests more than not. So this completely false premise, but you can see here the confidential memorandum. Here we go again. Fox News has released a series of polls in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, all of which show the head-to-head race between President Trump and Kamala Harris well within the margin of error. However, that doesn't account for Fox News' own margin of error in their fall surveys. And it goes through specifics compared to the Fox News surveys from 2020 taken nearest to this date in the election. President Trump's marginal election year ranged from +2 over the survey in Georgia to +5 over the survey in North Carolina to +9 over the survey in Arizona and Nevada. And it's making a case. Maybe some of this is accurate. I have no idea. That's not the point. But it's trying to dissect this Fox poll to say, bad polls are not to be believed. Trump, at speeches, as we've been watching over and over, has been saying the polls are rigged. And actually, because I'm referencing that, let's go ahead and look at it right now, because Trump was just at an event and said this.
And every time they see me going up in the polls, and we're leading in the polls, and I think we're leading by a lot. You know, the polls are rigged too. The polls are rigged too. You know, they say Donald Trump is tied. You know, we were up massively by Biden. How would you like to be me? I spent $100 million on beating.
So, again, I don't want to spend too much time on that part of it because we covered it in a different segment, but it's so absurd to go, we're leading in all the polls, but also the polls are rigged. And that's why we're not leading. My colleague Jaden just told me, and you can look at this on screen, we're going to put on screen. 5 million views last week came from people who aren't subscribed. If that's one of you, click that subscribe button, baby. It's easy, it's free, but it makes all the difference. Back to the video. But this particular Fox poll aside, we've been seeing this rhetoric coming out of Trump and the Trump campaign a lot, which is to say, no, all the polls are rigged now. We were citing them before, and this is the crazy part, we were citing them before as proof that we had such a strong campaign. The American people are sick of Joe Biden, and that's why the polls show that Trump's leading. But now, you can't believe the polls. They're rigged. But again, as I said in a different segment, what would be the benefit to the Democrats of rigging polls to make them look like they're in better standing? They say it's to discourage Republicans from voting, but that's not how it works. When there's a narrow lead, which is what we see for Harris, a narrow lead, that's the best motivator. Because you think it's possible that we can win. People overperform the polls all the time. But we definitely got to go vote. So that's a good... This would be what you would do if you could rig the polls to help Republicans, is to motivate them. But they say the opposite. Makes no sense. It's just panic. That's what this is. Freaking out over the fact that there's a real surge. There's something real going on in the momentum that Kamala Harris's campaign has. Does that mean she's going to win? No, doesn't. We're going to have to do the work. And some of the things they're citing, I'm sure there are plenty of examples. I'm pretty sure in a general sense, Trump did overperform the polls in 2020 and still lost, but overperformed them. But we've also seen in recent years, Democrats overperform the polls in significant ways. And it's why 1, 2, 3 points difference in some of these different things is meaningless in how we act. Honestly, even if Kamala Harris had a 10-point lead, it would be meaningless because we got to go out and vote. But since he brought it up, 538 in their simulations that they do, they'll run 1,000 simulations using different things to craft this forecast, polling being one of them, the average of the different polls, as well as, like I said, different factors. And right now it's standing at Harris winning 58 out of 100 times and Trump winning 42 out of 100 times. Things that happen 42 out of 100 times, that have that odds of happening, happen sometimes, rather often actually. Less often than something that has a chance of happening 58 out of 100 times. But the point is, we should still be terrified of the prospect of Trump winning because it's still all too likely. And that's why work is so necessary. The national just head-to-head polling average of 538 has Harris with a 3.4 percentage point lead. But you can see it's tightened a little bit. She got up to 3.6, then it dropped to 3.4. Not sure if this is yet taking into consideration much a DNC bump. Looks like some of this could be taking that into consideration. So again, a close race is what we're looking at, and Harris in the Real Clear Politics with a 1.6 percentage point. It's always been tighter in the Real Clear Politics average of polls. But do you know what's really exciting to me? Okay, all of that. Trump's upset. You know, his campaign releasing memorandums to say this is not legitimate. Don't freak out, even if it's Fox News. But a really good sign, as I showed you in a different segment, but we'll play a little bit more this time because I was rushing through it last time, is the registration numbers we're seeing as reported on by CBS News.
Tracking something really interesting going on right now. It's a surge in voter registration in key groups ahead of the November election. Among young black women, registration is up more than 175%. You heard that right, more than 175%. In 13 states. That's compared to the same time in 2020. This, according to the data firm TargetSmart. Registration has also increased among young Latinas and Black Americans. Tom Bonnier joins us now. He's a senior advisor at TargetSmart. Tom, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in. 175%, can that possibly be right? You must have triple checked this or many more times than that.
You're right to repeat the number because I've more than triple checked it. It's incredibly unusual to see changes in voter registration that are anywhere close to this. I mean, to remind people, 175% is almost tripling of registration rates among this specific group. You just don't see that sort of thing happen in elections normally.
And what does that tell us, if anything, about either enthusiasm, attention, propensity to vote for these newly registered participants?
Tells us a lot. The reason that we look at this voter registration data is because the polls will only tell us so much. The polls tell us how people are going to vote. They don't tell us if or who is going to vote. It's a big question. The best indicator of that is the actions that people are taking. Number one, registering to vote. Someone who says, I want to participate in this election. And so as we've seen these questions of which side has the advantage in intensity and enthusiasm, we look for changes in voter registration.
And it really does seem there's just a boom of energy for the Harris campaign and groups you might think could be disproportionately Democrats registering to vote. It's a great phrase, too. You often can't tell who's actually going to go out and vote, and that's why Democrats in the last few years have overperformed polls. The specific examples I'm thinking of, just to be as fact-based as I can, the 2023, those off-year elections, those consistently you saw Democrats overperforming. And it seems that, for example, the impact of the overturning of Roe v. Wade brought out a lot of voters, women voters specifically, who weren't accounted for, weren't typically assumed to be likely voters, but they voted maybe because of that issue. And the hope is that that issue combined with a bunch of others are going to cause a huge overperformance of the polls for Democrats. The other good thing that we've been following is the ground game. And we looked at the figures in a recent conversation about this, but essentially field offices, volunteers, money being raised, each and every one of those is showing more on the ground infrastructure, more on the ground resources on the Harris side compared to the Trump side. So all of this is to give us hope and motivation to be properly informed. None of it's to be sitting back feeling good about November, because we're going to work every day between now and then. By the way, if you do want to donate, contribute to that really good fundraising, you can do it by clicking the link in the description of this video. Please do that if you haven't already. And before making my final point on just sort of a thing I think campaigns shouldn't do, and we've seen this on both ends, here is MSNBC reporting on good economic numbers.
Morning, new data presents a fresh look at the U.S. economy. U.S. GDP grew at an annual rate of 3% for the second quarter of this year. That beats the previous estimate of 2.8%. And it's up from the 1.4% increase in the first quarter. Joining us now is NBC's Christine Romans. Christine, what do these numbers tell us this morning?
It tells us that the economy was actually strengthening in, April, May, and June, stronger and more resilient than anyone really expected. The consumer driving a lot of this, the consumer irritated by high prices, but still spending, maybe changing how they're spending, what they're spending on, but still driving the economy. And also inside these numbers, Jose, really important here, private business investment, very strong, showing optimism about the overall economy, optimism about corporate profits. It's kind of...
And they continue on with some specifics there, but that's good. We saw the freak out in MAGA world. See, the economy's terrible, when that pretty big revision happened to the jobs numbers. 800,000+ weren't actually added based on our original estimates. Still solid job growth. But they pointed to that as proof that, number one, there was a conspiracy to mislead people. That's not true. But number two, that the economy is actually about to collapse. Always the thing. Stock market goes a little bit, or no, let's be honest, it dipped pretty significantly. They say everything's going to collapse all because of Kamala Harris. The Kamala crash. And then it's back breaking records, silence. Similar thing here. Another revision we get is that GDP growth has actually been stronger than we previously thought in the last year. And 3%, especially given where interest rates are and given the jobs difference, that's super strong and really hopeful as to what we're going to see going forward. I don't think we're going to see that Kamala crash they seem to be rooting for. And instead, on the global stage, we're really dominating and doing a really strong job, even with all of the issues we want to address. But my final thought on the polling related thing is, I remember when the Biden campaign, it would irk me and not really make me feel better about the chances when the response would be from Biden and his surrogates, polls schmoles. Because it's not, people get mixed up about this. Polls don't mean anything in the sense that that's not what determines elections. Going to the polls, voting is what makes the decisions. And we've seen huge upsets and we've seen things that break away from the polling reality, which shows that. But polls give us a lot of really interesting insights into just general trends and general standing. One of them is when you look at huge crowds or you look at huge donations to Kamala Harris' campaign and you're trying to understand, is this good branding on her part? Is this hopeful thinking, or is this real? Combining into a broader picture of metrics, polling is very valuable. So don't put all your eggs in that basket. Don't act like that's the end all be all. It's a snapshot in time, and it gives us some insight, and it's not perfect. But the polling swing we've seen in momentum has matched the discussions I'm having in personal day-to-day conversations. The DNC energy, the crowds she's been able to get, the fundraising numbers. And when you put it all together, then you get a really well-informed picture of a momentum swing that's really historically notable. But I remember sometimes Biden would sort of do who cares? And my response was always to you guys, we have to not act like if you're trailing in the polls, it's over. That's what I didn't want. So I liked that Biden would say, no, it's not over till it's over. But I would always say we need to see a shift between now and the election day, back when the polls looked bad. And so in this case, we should be hopeful the polls look like they do. It's also, even if they were exactly where they are today, not the most comfortable situation to be in. So we got to work every day until the election. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get extra content daily and support the show, you can do it by clicking the join button below.